October 25, 1944. 0347 hours. Surigao Strait, Philippines. In the pre-dawn darkness, Japanese Admiral Shoji Nishimura stood on the bridge of the battleship Yamashiro, unaware that his entire battle line was steaming into the most perfectly executed naval ambush in maritime history. What followed in the next 4 minutes would not only seal the fate of his flagship but would demonstrate how American submarine-launched torpedoes, running silent at depths the Japanese believed impossible, had evolved into precision instruments of destruction that could crack open a battleship's hull like an eggshell. The Japanese had 4 minutes from the moment of launch to the moment of impact, 4 minutes that would prove utterly insufficient to save vessels they believed were invulnerable to underwater attack. The transformation of American torpedo warfare had begun in failure, not triumph. December 7, 1941, Pearl Harbor. While Japanese aircraft devastated Battleship Row above the surface, American submarine commanders in the Pacific Fleet were unknowingly equipped with weapons that would betray them for the next 2 years. The Mark 14 torpedo, standard issue for United States submarines since 1931, carried a theoretical promise of devastating power. Bureau of Ordnance documents specified a weapon 20 feet 6 inches in length, weighing 3,280 pounds, carrying a 643-pound Torpex warhead capable of breaking a capital ship's keel. The Mark 6 magnetic influence exploder, designed to detonate beneath a target's hull rather than on contact, represented what Navy engineers considered revolutionary thinking in torpedo design. But theory and reality had diverged catastrophically. From December 1941 through August 1943, American submarine commanders filed report after report of torpedo failures. Commodore James Fife, commanding submarines in the Southwest Pacific, documented in his war diary what he termed the torpedo scandal: perfectly aimed weapons that ran too deep, exploded prematurely, or failed to detonate at all. Lieutenant Commander Lawson Ramage, commanding USS Trout, filed an after-action report on March 15, 1942, that captured the desperation, fired 6 torpedoes at merchantmen from 800 yards. Heard 4 solid hits. Target continued on course. No visible damage. His patrol report concluded with barely concealed fury: request immediate investigation of torpedo performance. Crews risking lives with defective weapons. The Japanese, meanwhile, had developed their own torpedo doctrine based on careful analysis of American capabilities, or what they believed were American capabilities. Intelligence reports captured after the Battle of Midway revealed Japanese naval assessments that fundamentally underestimated American torpedo technology. Captain Tamichi Hara, commanding destroyer Shiger, testified in post-war interrogations about Japanese assumptions. We calculated American torpedoes ran at maximum depth of 4 meters, approximately 13 feet. Our battleship armor extended to 5 meters below waterline. Simple mathematics suggested invulnerability to submarine attack when properly compartmentalized. Japanese battleship construction reflected this confidence. The Yamashiro, launched in 1915 and extensively modernized in 1933 to 1935, featured underwater protection designed by the Imperial Japanese Navy's construction department. Technical specifications documented armor belts extending 16 feet below the waterline, with elaborate anti-torpedo bulges containing fuel oil and void spaces meant to absorb blast energy. The Fuso-class battleships, including Yamashiro and her sister ship Fuso, had been retrofitted based on lessons from earlier naval warfare. Engineering documents showed designers had studied British experiences at Jutland, where underwater damage had proved catastrophic. They believed they had created vessels that could survive multiple torpedo hits through compartmentalization and redundant systems. What Japanese naval architects had not anticipated was the American capacity for rapid technological evolution driven by battlefield failure. By mid-1943, the combination of field modifications, desperate submarine commanders conducting unauthorized tests, and finally official Bureau of Ordnance acknowledgement of defects had transformed the Mark 14 from a liability into a weapon that would revolutionize undersea warfare. The fix, when it finally came, would prove devastating to every assumption Japanese naval planners had made about underwater protection. The transformation began not in Washington's bureaucratic offices, but in forward submarine bases where commanders took matters into their own hands. Pearl Harbor's submarine repair facility, commanded by Captain Charles Lockwood, became ground zero for an unauthorized revolution in torpedo warfare. June 1943. Submarine tender USS Whitney at Pearl Harbor. Lieutenant Commander William Wright, executive officer of USS Guardfish, documented in his personal log what would become known as the Midnight Requisition Program. Submarine crews, working with sympathetic ordnance technicians, began systematically disabling the Mark VI magnetic exploders and adjusting depth settings based on field observations rather than Bureau specifications. The breakthrough came from Commander Dudley Morton, commanding USS Wahoo. His patrol report from July 1943 detailed unauthorized modifications, deactivated magnetic exploder. Set depth setting 4 feet shallower than specified. Fired 4 torpedoes at merchantmen. 4 hits. Target sank in 3 minutes. Recommend immediate fleet-wide adoption. By September 1943, Admiral Lockwood, now commanding Pacific submarines, officially authorized what crews had been doing secretly for months. Technical Bulletin 43-7, issued September 1, 1943, revolutionized American torpedo warfare. All submarines shall deactivate Mark VI magnetic exploders. Depth settings reduced by 4 feet. Contact exploders only. But the true revolution came with modifications to running depth capabilities. Engineers at Pearl Harbor's submarine base discovered that by adjusting the hydrostat valve mechanisms and modifying the gyroscope stabilization systems, torpedoes could run reliably at depths previously considered impossible, up to 25 feet below the surface while maintaining targeting accuracy. Commander Richard O'Kane, executive officer turned commanding officer of USS Tang, filed technical reports documenting the new capabilities. His after-action report from October 1943 described engaging a Japanese cruiser, fired spread of 6 torpedoes. Set running depth 20 feet. All weapons ran true. For hits observed below waterline. Target developed severe list and sank within 8 minutes. The implications for Japanese naval architecture proved catastrophic. Japanese battleship designers had calculated protection needed only to depths they believed American torpedoes could reach. Technical documents captured from the Naval Technical Department revealed their fatal assumption: enemy torpedoes' maximum reliable running depth, 4 meters. Armor protection extends to 5 meters. Adequate safety margin maintained. By early 1944, American submarines carried weapons that could strike 7.5 meters, nearly 25 feet, below the surface, running silent and true. The depth at which Japanese battleship armor ended, American torpedoes now routinely operated below. Every battleship in the Imperial Japanese Navy had been designed with a blind spot that American ingenuity had learned to exploit. The Mark XIV torpedo, once derided as the worst weapon in the American arsenal, had become something far more dangerous, a precisely calibrated instrument that struck where enemy designers had never imagined protection necessary. Running time from launch to impact averaged 4 minutes at typical engagement ranges. For minutes during which Japanese lookouts might spot a periscope, captains might order emergency turns, and damage control parties might brace for impact. For minutes that would prove utterly insufficient when American submarines began hunting Japanese battleships in earnest. The perfect opportunity to test these improved weapons against Japanese capital ships came in the Philippine Sea, where American naval intelligence had achieved something unprecedented: complete knowledge of enemy movements before battle commenced. October 24, 1944, 1800 hours. Pacific Fleet Intelligence Center, Pearl Harbor. Commander Edwin Layton, Fleet Intelligence Officer, reviewed Decrypt JN-25 Intercept 4471, marked Ultra Secret. The message, sent from Japanese Southern Force Headquarters, detailed Admiral Nishimura's exact route through Surigao Strait, timing, and ship composition. By 2000 hours, Admiral Jesse Oldendorf, commanding 7th Fleet's Bombardment Group, possessed intelligence that naval commanders throughout history would have considered impossible: perfect knowledge of enemy intentions, timing, and route. His operations order, issued at 2130 hours October 24, reflected this advantage. Enemy battle line will enter Surigao Strait approximately 0300 hours. Will proceed north through strait. Battleships Yamashiro and Fuso confirmed in formation. But Oldendorf's plan involved more than his own surface vessels. Coordinating with Rear Admiral Ralph Christie, commanding submarines in the Southwest Pacific, a gauntlet was prepared that would test Japanese battleship survivability against modern torpedo attack. USS Dace, commanded by Commander Buell Claggett, had been positioned off the southern entrance to Surigao Strait since October 22. Her patrol orders, documented in ComSubPac files, specified, maintain station. Report enemy movement. Attack capital ships with full torpedo spread. Priority targets, battleships. October 25, 0230 hours. Dace made radar contact at 18,000 yards. Claggett's patrol report described the approach, identified 2 battleship signatures. Speed approximately 18 knots. Course 350 degrees. Sea state 2. Visibility excellent. Moon quarter full. At 0309 hours, Dace reached firing position 1,200 yards off the port beam of the lead battleship, later identified as Yamashiro. Claggett's firing solution, reconstructed from ship's logs, represented the culmination of 3 years of hard-won experience. Range, 1,200 yards. Target speed, 18 knots. Target angle, 85 degrees port. Depth setting, 22 feet. Spread, 6 torpedoes at 1.5 degree intervals. The Mark 14 torpedoes, each carrying 643 pounds of Torpex explosive, left their tubes at 4-second intervals beginning at 0310 hours and 14 seconds. Running at 46 knots, the weapons would require approximately 140 seconds, just over 2 minutes, to reach their target. The acoustic signature of their launch would be detectable by Japanese sonar within 30 seconds, giving Yamashiro's captain approximately 110 seconds to react. Admiral Nishimura, according to surviving records from destroyer Shiger, received the warning at 0310:45. Torpedo launch detected. Port beam. Multiple weapons. The mathematics were simple and brutal. Yamashiro displaced 34,700 tons. At 18 knots, she required approximately 1,200 yards in 4 minutes to complete an emergency turn. The torpedoes, running at 46 knots at a depth below her armor belt, would cover 1,200 yards in 140 seconds. The battleship had neither the time nor the capability to avoid what came next. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. October 25, 1944, 0310 hours and 14 seconds. The moment Commander Claggett ordered Fire 1 aboard USS Dace, a sequence of events began that would unfold with mechanical precision over the next 237 seconds. The Mark 14 torpedoes, each 20 feet 6 inches of precisely engineered destruction, accelerated to 46 knots within seconds of leaving their tubes. At 22 feet below the surface, they ran deeper than any Japanese sonar operator had been trained to detect. The weapon's contra-rotating propellers, designed to eliminate the telltale spiral wake of earlier torpedoes, left minimal surface disturbance. Aboard Yamashiro, Lieutenant Kenji Watanabe, the sonar officer, detected the first anomaly at 0310:45, exactly 31 seconds after launch. His report, reconstructed from Shiger's surviving records, captured the confusion: underwater contact. Bearing 270. Multiple propeller signatures. Depth, indeterminate. Running deeper than standard parameters. Admiral Nishimura's response came within seconds. Emergency turn to starboard. All engines ahead flank. Sound general quarters. The orders were textbook, exactly what Japanese naval doctrine prescribed for torpedo attack. But doctrine had been written assuming threats at predictable depths, running at speeds their calculations could counter. Yamashiro's engineering logs, recovered by salvage operations in 1952, documented the response. At 0311:00, engine room telegraphs rang up flank speed. The battleship's 4 Campon-geared turbines, capable of producing 75,000 shaft horsepower, began driving the massive bronze propellers faster. But physics constrained even the most powerful warship. A vessel displacing 34,700 tons at 18 knots possesses enormous momentum. The rudder, angled to maximum 35 degrees, began forcing the stern to port, initiating a turn to starboard. But the turning radius at that speed and displacement measured approximately 900 yards. The turn would require 180 seconds to complete, 3 full minutes. The Torpedoes, running true at 22 feet depth, had covered 800 yards in the first minute. At 0311:14, exactly 1 minute after launch, they had 400 yards remaining to target. Japanese lookouts on Yamashiro's bridge wings reported phosphorescent wakes, though they were actually seeing turbulence from weapons running far deeper than they realized. Damage control parties throughout the battleship responded to general quarters. Watertight doors slammed shut. Damage Control Officer Lieutenant Commander Takeshi Yamamoto positioned teams at critical junctions, following procedures practiced hundreds of times. The anti-torpedo protection system, elaborate compartments of void spaces and fuel oil meant to absorb blast energy, stood ready to prove its design. But those designs assumed impacts at depths where armor existed. At 0312:00, 110 seconds after launch, the Torpedoes ran beneath the armored belt that Japanese engineers had so carefully calculated. They approached the unprotected hull sections that designers had never imagined would face direct attack. At 0312:34, exactly 140 seconds after leaving USS Dace, the first Mark 14 struck Yamashiro's port side, 27 feet below the waterline. The 643-pound Torpex warhead detonated with a force equivalent to 1,200 pounds of TNT. The explosion occurred in an area protected by nothing more than half-inch steel plating designed to withstand water pressure, not explosive force. The shock wave propagated through Yamashiro's hull at 4,000 feet per second. The initial blast created a rupture approximately 40 feet in diameter. Water pressure at 27 feet depth, approximately 12 pounds per square inch, immediately forced thousands of gallons per second through the breach. 4 seconds later, the second torpedo struck 60 feet forward of the first. Then the third. The fourth. The fifth. Within 16 seconds, 5 Mark 14 torpedoes had opened Yamashiro's port side like a surgeon's scalpel, each blast occurring below the level where Japanese designers had believed protection unnecessary. The battleship that Admiral Nishimura had believed unsinkable was flooding through wounds her builders had never imagined she would receive. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The physics of catastrophic flooding aboard a capital ship follow predictable patterns that Yamashiro's damage control teams understood theoretically but had never experienced at this scale. Within 60 seconds of the first torpedo strike, seawater had flooded compartments containing approximately 2,400 tons of displacement. The port list began immediately. Lieutenant Commander Yamamoto, directing damage control from the central station deep within the ship, received reports that shattered any hope of containment. His log, recovered with other documents during post-war salvage operations, documented the cascade, 0312:45, port engine room flooding. 0313:00, forward magazine compartments breached. 0313:15, list reaches 7 degrees. Counterflooding ordered. Counterflooding, deliberately flooding compartments on the opposite side to correct list, represented standard damage control procedure. But the technique required time and intact systems. Yamashiro's starboard ballast tanks could admit water at approximately 800 tons per minute under ideal conditions. The 5 torpedo breaches were admitting water at an estimated 3,000 tons per minute. The mathematics were brutal and irreversible. Engineering studies conducted by the U.S. Naval Technical Mission to Japan in 1946 analyzed Yamashiro's construction and determined that any 3 torpedo hits below the armored belt would exceed the ship's damage control capacity. She had suffered 5. On the bridge, Admiral Nishimura confronted a situation no amount of training had prepared him for. His flagship, which had survived 3 years of war and multiple combat actions, was dying in minutes from wounds inflicted by an enemy he had never seen. Survivor testimony from destroyer Shiger, positioned 1,200 yards astern, described Yamashiro's death throes with technical precision. At 0314:00, 90 seconds after the first impact, the battleship's list reached 12 degrees to port. This angle, while dramatic, remained within theoretical survival parameters. But aboard ship, the list created cascading secondary effects. Loose equipment tumbled. Personnel lost footing. More critically, fuel oil from ruptured bunkers began sloshing, creating free surface effect that worsened stability. Captain Hara, commanding Shiger, watched through binoculars and recorded his observations. 0314:30 Yamashiro list increasing rapidly. Main battery turrets trained maximum starboard, attempting to correct trim through weight distribution. Secondary explosions observed amidships. Suspected magazine detonations. Those magazine detonations confirmed what damage control parties had feared. Water flooding through torpedo breaches had reached the lower magazine spaces where Yamashiro stored shells for her 14-inch main guns. Each shell weighed 1,400 pounds. The magazines contained hundreds. When seawater reached the lower handling rooms, powder charges began deteriorating, some igniting spontaneously from heat and chemical reaction. At 0315:20, 4 minutes and 66 seconds after the first torpedo struck, Yamashiro's list reached 23 degrees. This angle represented the mathematical point of no return for battleship stability. Naval architecture studies define this as angle of law, the point where riding forces can no longer overcome listing momentum. Admiral Nishimura issued his final orders at 0315:45. Radio intercepts captured by U.S. Navy listening stations recorded his transmission: to all Southern Force units, Yamashiro heavily damaged. Unable to maintain station. Continue mission. Long live the Emperor. The transmission ended abruptly. Aboard Shiger, Captain Hara observed Yamashiro reach 30 degrees list. At this angle, water began flooding through ventilation shafts and uptakes never designed to be submerged. The flooding, already catastrophic, accelerated exponentially. At 0316:43, the battleship's list reached 45 degrees. Personnel still aboard could no longer maintain footing. Equipment, ammunition, bodies, everything not secured, tumbled toward the port side. The massive pagoda superstructure, towering 130 feet above the waterline, created enormous overturning leverage at this angle. At 0317:08, 6 minutes and 54 seconds after USS Dace fired her first torpedo, Yamashiro capsized completely, her starboard side turning skyward, propellers still rotating slowly, before she slid beneath the surface of Surigao Strait. Of 1,636 officers and men aboard, approximately 1,400 died with their ship. While Yamashiro disappeared beneath Surigao Strait, her sister ship Fuso encountered her own nightmare 4 miles to the south. USS Darter, commanded by Commander David McClintock, had maintained position parallel to Dace, creating a coordinated ambush that Japanese doctrine had never anticipated. At 0318 hours, McClintock fired a 6-torpedo spread from 1,400 yards. His patrol report, filed 3 weeks later at Pearl Harbor, documented the attack with technical precision. Targets: battleship Fuso and heavy cruiser. Selected battleship as primary. Firing solution: range 1,400 yards, speed 18 knots, angle on bow 95 degrees port. Depth setting 23 feet. Fan spread 2-degree intervals. The deeper depth setting, 23 feet versus the previous generation's maximum of 13 feet, represented the culmination of American torpedo evolution. Japanese naval constructor Captain Fukuda Kenji, interrogated in 1946 by the U.S. Naval Technical Mission, explained the fatal miscalculation. All our battleship protection schemes assumed enemy torpedoes would strike between 3 and 4 meters depth. We extended armor to 5 meters for safety margin. American weapons at 7 meters, this was impossible according to our intelligence. That impossible capability doomed Fuso as surely as it had destroyed her sister. 4 torpedoes struck within 22 seconds, each detonating well below the armored belt. The impacts occurred along a 200-foot section of the port side, opening the hull to massive flooding that damage control procedures could not contain. But Fuso's death revealed something beyond simple destruction. It demonstrated the psychological collapse that accompanied this form of warfare. Radio intercepts from destroyer Musashi, escorting the battle line, captured communications that showed the mental state of Japanese forces encountering weapons they believed shouldn't exist. At 0319:30, Musashi transmitted, "Torpedo attack. Weapons running at impossible depth. Request verification of enemy capability." The desperation in that transmission, requesting verification during combat, revealed how completely American torpedoes had shattered Japanese understanding of naval warfare. Captain Hara, aboard Shiger, recorded his observations of both sinkings in his log, both battleships destroyed within minutes by underwater attack. Weapons appeared to strike far below waterline. No defensive measures proved effective. Traditional countermeasures, speed, maneuver, anti-torpedo bulges, meaningless against these depths. The Battle of Surigao Strait continued through the night, but the psychological damage to Japanese naval doctrine had been inflicted in those first 20 minutes. 2 battleships, representing decades of construction effort and embodying Japan's naval power, had been eliminated by submarine attacks that doctrine said should be survivable. USS Darter and Dace withdrew successfully, having expended 12 torpedoes to sink 2 battleships, a cost-exchange ratio that naval planners would have considered fantasy before the war. The submarines suffered no damage, no casualties, and were never detected visually by their targets. Post-war analysis by the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey examined captured Japanese naval records and determined that the Surigao Strait disaster fundamentally altered Japanese naval thinking. Fleet Admiral Somu Toyota, commanding the combined fleet, issued a directive on November 3, 1944, obtained from captured files. Battleship operations in submarine-patrolled waters suspended pending development of countermeasures against deep-running torpedoes. Current protection schemes inadequate. That directive effectively ended Japanese battleship employment in offensive operations. The vessels that had symbolized naval power for 40 years could no longer operate safely in waters where American submarines hunted. The 4 minutes between torpedo launch and impact had proved insufficient not just to save individual ships, but to save an entire class of warship from obsolescence. The revolution wasn't just technological, it was psychological. Japanese naval officers who had spent careers preparing for surface gun battles found their entire professional expertise negated by weapons that struck from invisible platforms at depths they had never imagined defending against. The War Diary of Vice Admiral Kyohide Shima, commanding 2nd Striking Force, captured the transformation. The age of the battleship has ended. The Americans have made them obsolete with weapons we cannot counter. The destruction in Surigao Strait represented more than tactical victory, it demonstrated an industrial and technological gap that no amount of Japanese courage could bridge. While Yamashiro and Fuso sank in Philippine waters, the infrastructure that had created their destruction stretched across the Pacific in a supply chain Japan could never replicate. The Mark 14 torpedoes that destroyed both battleships had been manufactured at the Naval Torpedo Station in Newport, Rhode Island, and the Naval Ordnance Plant in Forest Park, Illinois. Production records from the War Production Board documented output that would have seemed impossible in 1941, 2,500 torpedoes per month by mid-1944, each weapon incorporating improvements discovered through combat experience. Compare this to Japanese production. Intelligence documents captured in 1945 revealed that all Japanese torpedo manufacturing occurred at a single facility, the Kure Naval Arsenal. Maximum monthly production never exceeded 400 weapons, and quality control issues plagued every batch. Japanese submarines carried torpedoes that varied significantly in performance due to manufacturing inconsistencies. But the disparity extended beyond manufacturing. The napalm-based fuel that thickened American torpedo propellant for reliable deep running came from chemical plants operated by Standard Oil in Texas and Shell Oil in California. The Torpex explosive filling, more powerful than TNT, required specialized production facilities that only the United States and Britain possessed. Japan had nothing comparable. Lieutenant Commander Yoshitaka Miwa, captured submarine commander interrogated in February 1945, provided revealing testimony to Office of Naval Intelligence debriefers. "We knew American industrial capacity exceeded ours. We did not comprehend the speed at which they could identify problems and implement solutions across their entire submarine force. Our torpedo improvement program took 18 months. Americans implemented changes in weeks." That speed of adaptation reflected a fundamental difference in organizational culture. American submarine commanders filed detailed after-action reports that engineers at Newport and Pearl Harbor analyzed immediately. Problems identified in patrol reports triggered rapid prototyping and testing. Solutions proven effective were implemented fleet-wide through technical bulletins distributed to every submarine tender. The Japanese system, by contrast, required formal proposals submitted through multiple layers of bureaucracy before testing could begin. Innovation came from the top down rather than bottom up. Field commanders' observations often took months to reach designers, and implementation required approval from Naval General Staff in Tokyo. Commander Eugene Fluckey, commanding USS Barb, documented this advantage in his patrol report from January 1945, received Technical Bulletin 44-12 while on patrol. Describes improved depth-keeping mechanism developed from Tang's patrol reports. Modifications implemented by submarine tender produce during 3-day refit. First combat employment successful. New depth control allowed precision targeting of cargo vessel in shallow water previously considered unsuitable for torpedo attack. That cycle, combat experience to engineering analysis to fleet-wide implementation in weeks, represented an institutional learning capability that Japan could not match. Every American submarine became a testing platform. Every patrol generated data. Every success was replicated across the force. The technological disparity extended to targeting systems as well. By late 1944, American submarines carried the Mark 8 torpedo data computer, an analog fire control system that could calculate torpedo firing solutions continuously while tracking multiple targets. Japanese submarines relied on manual calculations using plotting boards, methods essentially unchanged since World War I. Sonar capabilities illustrated the same pattern. American submarines employed the QB sonar system, capable of detecting targets at 4,000 yards and providing accurate range and bearing information. Japanese passive sonar rarely exceeded 2,000-yard detection range and provided only approximate bearings. These technical advantages compounded during actual combat. American submarines could detect targets earlier, calculate firing solutions faster, and deliver weapons that ran deeper and more reliably than anything in Japanese arsenals. The 4 minutes between launch and impact became 4 minutes during which superior American technology overcame distance, depth, and defensive measures. Japanese naval officers, trained to believe in spiritual superiority compensating for material disadvantage, discovered that in modern industrial warfare, spirit meant nothing when technology created gaps too wide to bridge through determination alone. The 4 minutes between torpedo launch and battleship destruction at Surigao Strait echoed far beyond that October night in 1944. The battle represented the last time battleships would fight battleships, and the first time submarine warfare demonstrated it could eliminate capital ships with surgical precision. Post-war analysis revealed staggering statistics. Between September 1943, when torpedo improvements became standard, and August 1945, American submarines sank 214 Japanese warships totaling over 900,000 tons. This included 1 battleship, 8 aircraft carriers, and 11 cruisers. The Mark 14 torpedo, once considered the worst weapon in the American arsenal, had become the most effective anti-ship weapon of the Pacific War. Japanese defensive responses, developed too late and implemented too slowly, never succeeded in countering the deep-running torpedo threat. Documents from the Naval Technical Department showed efforts to extend battleship armor belts to greater depths, but such modifications required drydock time Japan no longer possessed and resources it could not spare. Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz, in his post-war assessment submitted to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, wrote, "The submarine and the torpedo transformed naval warfare more fundamentally than any other technological development of the war. The ability to strike capital ships below their armor belts, from invisible platforms, at ranges they could not counter, rendered traditional surface supremacy meaningless in submarine-patrolled waters. The human cost transcended statistics. Of the 16,000 Japanese sailors who served aboard battleships sunk by submarine attack during the war, fewer than 3,000 survived. The 4 minutes between launch and impact proved insufficient not just for maneuvering, but for effective abandon ship procedures when vessels capsized and sank so rapidly. American submarine crews, meanwhile, paid their own price despite technological superiority. The United States lost 52 submarines during the Pacific War, the highest casualty rate of any American military service at 22%. Commander Claggett of USS Dace survived the war but watched 13 sister submarines fail to return from patrol. Commander McClintock of Darter would lose his boat to a reef in November 1944, though his crew survived. The psychological impact on surviving Japanese naval officers shaped post-war naval thinking globally. Captain Hara, one of the few destroyer commanders to survive the entire war, wrote in his 1961 memoir, "We prepared for surface battle and faced submarine warfare we could not counter. American torpedoes running at depths we believed impossible taught us that assumptions kill as surely as weapons." The lessons influenced Cold War submarine development by all naval powers. The Soviet Union, studying American success, invested heavily in submarine forces. Modern torpedoes trace their lineage directly to the Mark 14's improved versions, with contemporary weapons capable of running even deeper, faster, and with guided targeting systems that make the 4-minute warning period obsolete. The wrecks of Yamashiro and Fuso remain in Surigao Strait, designated war graves by both American and Japanese governments. Salvage operations have been prohibited, leaving the battleships as underwater monuments to the night when submarine warfare proved it could eliminate the most powerful surface vessels with weapons they never saw coming. In 2019, the 75th anniversary of the battle, veterans from both nations met at memorial services in the Philippines. The few remaining survivors, now in their 90s, acknowledged what combat had proven, that technological superiority, industrial capacity, and rapid adaptation created gaps that courage alone could never bridge. The 4 minutes between torpedo launch and battleship destruction at Surigao Strait measured more than time, they measured the distance between eras, between doctrines, between assumptions and reality. They marked the moment when underwater warfare proved that the mightiest ships could be destroyed by weapons running silent in the deep, striking where armor ended and vulnerability began, demonstrating that in modern war, the visible threat often proves less decisive than the one that approaches unseen. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.